In our economics class today, we shall be looking at theory of consumer behavior. And under this theory, we have divided into two. We are looking at the first part today, where we'll be looking at definition of utility, followed by the concept of utility. We shall also examine law of diminishing marginal utility. Utility. This is the satisfaction that a consumer derived from consuming a commodity at a particular time. That is, when we are talking about utility, every commodity has something to offer a consumer. So whatever consumer derives from consuming the commodity is what we mean by utility. So every commodity is available in order to satisfy consumer wants. And when we are talking about consumer utility in economics, we are trying to know the size or the measurement that when you consume a commodity, what is the volume that you derive from consuming it. Then how can we understand this better? Let us look at the concept of utility. Number one, total utility is the total amount of satisfaction a consumer derives from the consumption of a commodity. That is, when you consume a commodity, what is the total amount of satisfaction derived from that commodity? There is a way of doing the measurement. We are still going to look at that later. The second one, marginal utility, is the additional satisfaction derived by consuming an extra unit of a good. Now, when we say extra unit, take for instance, somebody is in need of water, and if the person gets the water, maybe from the first bottle or from a glass cup, he will derive a satisfaction taking the first bottle or the first glass. If the person requests for more, that's it, the second bottle will come up, or second glass. Taking the second glass, it implies that there will be additional satisfaction that the person will derive from consuming extra unit of that commodity. So what we are trying to understand here is that you cannot assume that the satisfaction you derive from the first consumption will be the same with the second consumption. There will be a drop. That is, from the first consumption to the second consumption, there will be a drop, but there is additional satisfaction derived from it. So when we are talking about marginal utility, we are looking at the changes that will occur between the first consumption of a commodity and the second consumption of that particular commodity is what we are looking into in marginal utility. Now, we are going to look at relationship between total utility and marginal utility. Using this schedule, consumption of water. Take for instance, units, total utility, marginal utility. The first glass of water, the total utility is 20. The change is going to be, the marginal utility will be 20. But the second glass cup of water gives 32. That is, the summation from the first glass to the second glass happens to be 32 in terms of measurement. The change from between the first glass and the second glass happens to be 12. That is, the second glass gave the person just 12 increase. When you compare with the first one, the first glass cup of water, the person is able to derive 20 utility. But when it comes to the second glass cup of water, the utility has dropped. That is, the marginal utility has dropped, although there is an increase in the consumption. But the change between the first glass of water and the second glass of water is 12. Let's assume the person requests for third glass of water, where the total utility for the third glass of water is 40. The change between the second glass and the fourth and the third glass is 8. That is, the increase that the person has derived from the consumption of that water is 8. Now, the person further in the consumption of water, the fourth glass gives 42 in terms of total utility. The change between the third glass and the fourth glass happens to be 2. That is, the satisfaction the person derived between the third and the fourth glass of water is just 20. Now, the person further his consumption, asking for the 5th glass of water, where the satisfaction is just 40. And the difference between the 4th glass of water and the 5th glass of water is just 0. The implication is that the person has not derived any satisfaction when he took the 5th glass of water. So there is no increase in the consumption. That is, the marginal utility is 0. Now, let's assume the person move forward to take another glass of water, that is the 6th glass. Now, the utility is 39. So what this thing is telling us that when he takes the 6th glass of water, there is no satisfaction at all. But what happened? There is dissatisfaction. So if there is dissatisfaction, the difference between the 5th glass and the 6th glass of water indicates -3. That is, there is no satisfaction. Even the person is not even getting himself for taking the 6th glass of water. So the implication, what we are trying to understand here is that as the total utility is increasing, the marginal utility is decreasing at a diminishing rate. Let me repeat. As the total utility is increasing, marginal utility is decreasing at a diminishing rate. But when the total utility gets to peak, the marginal utility is 0. So the 6th glass of water indicates that the total utility is dropping. And when the total utility is dropping, the marginal utility will be negative. Graphical relationship between total utility and marginal utility. This is the utility axis and this is unit axis. You observe that we have a curve here going up, and after a point it drops. That's what we call total utility. That is, total utility will be increasing gradually up to a point here. That after this point it will drop. So it implies that total utility has reached its peak, the maximum. So after its peak it drops. Let's come to marginal utility curve. These are marginal utility curve. That the marginal utility is dropping as the total utility is increasing. We have demonstrated that with table. Now, we want to look at relationship. You will see that as total utility is growing, increasing, marginal utility is dropping gradually. But when the marginal utility reaches its peak, you observe that marginal utility is 0. That is, at the 5th unit, the marginal utility is 0 here, while total utility is at its peak. Now, when you further the consumption of such commodity, the total utility drops. What happens to marginal utility? It becomes negative. That is, after 0, we have minus, that is negative. So, what we are trying to understand is that the relationship between total utility and marginal utility states that as total utility is increasing, marginal utility will be decreasing at a diminishing rate. But when total utility reaches peak, that we call saturation point, marginal utility will be negative. And after the saturation point, total utility will decrease, that is, will drop. So what happens to marginal? Marginal utility will become negative. What is law of diminishing marginal utility? It states that the satisfaction derived from consuming successive units of a good will diminish as total consumption of the good increases. That is, a consumer consumes more and more units of a specific good. The utility from the successive unit goes on diminishing. We have demonstrated this with the aid of a schedule and a graph. What is consumer equilibrium? A consumer maximizes utility at equilibrium level when the marginal utility of the commodity equals the price of the commodity. That is, marginal utility of commodity X. So let's assume the commodity is X. So if the marginal utility of commodity X is equal to the price of that commodity, that is commodity X, then consumer is at equilibrium point. But where the commodity is more than one, this where it involves more than one commodity, it will be marginal utility of commodity X divided by price of commodity X equal marginal utility of commodity Y divided by price of commodity Y equal marginal utility of commodity Z divided by price of commodity Z. So you observe that it's like we are dividing marginal utility of commodity X by price of commodity X here. So that is what we arrive at. So when for consumer to be at equilibrium, it will ensure that the marginal utility of the commodity equals the price of the commodity. That is the point that consumer can be at equilibrium point. Examples. Question 1. As consumption of beer increases, its marginal utility to a drinker will A. Increase, B. Remain constant, C. Fluctuate, D. Decrease. The right answer is D. Decrease. Question 2. By utility, we mean A. Usefulness, B. Power of satisfying a want, C. Beneficial, D. Consumable. The right answer is B. Power of satisfying a want. Question 3. In most cases, the marginal utility derived from a particular good A. Increases as additional units are consumed, B. Increases at a decreasing rate as additional units are consumed, C. Decreases as additional units are consumed, D. Remains constant as additional units are consumed. The right answer is decreases as additional units are consumed.